Hello, I'm Alexander, and I want to speak about one topic that I was particularly excited for the last year, I would say. Let's start with kind of stating the obvious. We like AI, we feel it's kind of limited, we like small automations that we can do with it. It helps us occasionally with some tasks. We're like not always satisfied with its responses. We feel like there is definitely a big room for improvement for AI and for its application in the real world. But I'm trying right now to think about what is the future then. Will it get faster? Will it get smarter? Will it get more relevant? Will it have more context about me or the world surrounding me, or being more real time in some cases? So one particular idea that I keep entertaining and I keep sharing with people is, what if we can treat AI as magic? And hold on, I'm not applying a term of magic to AI. It's more like, how can we even define magic as itself based on, cultural knowings that we had before, and how can we compare it to AI and then find the differences and different approaches that might be interesting to, uncover them. So I will make a couple of examples from different, references, and we will kind of try to uncover it all together. So what I think right now is the biggest limitation of AI, it's actually our own language. Because every time we kind of ask it to generate something, it always tries to replicate the way we speak, the way we interpret some thoughts, and the way we are, using our language to express our ideas, emotions, and, trying to communicate in a certain way. But we developed our language from certain limitations. For example, we have kind of a limited memory inside of us, right? We can only remember so much, or we have to optimize many things, right? So, for example, we're using repetitive words in different sentences to to convey different things. So we already developed a system, language itself, that adapts to human limitations in order to communicate things and let us do our jobs and stuff. In terms of AI, I think it's actually a good precedent of thinking, what if we would prompt it, or what if there would be some kind of research that would develop its own language? And by doing that, it will be way more efficient because it doesn't have all of the human limitations that it has, and therefore it will have better, or not better, different type of perspective or different type of productivity, because it would not use the limitations we have and also the benefits we have, but it would use its own creative way of thinking. We all heard of stuff that, for example, in different languages, people think different, right? Or whenever you know multiple languages, you articulate things, or you talk in you think in different ways when you speak other language. And I think it might be true for AI as well, because if it has the corpus of not only English language, it has other languages, but imagine the alien language, right? For example, let's make a thought experiment. What if in new language, we speak right now in sentences, right? But what if in that language, every sentence in the world possible will always equal to one word? So in this way, you don't actually have to speak in sentences. And by this time, I could already retell you the book, But every sentence in the world has a certain word for it. So we could communicate way faster, and we would communicate with different emotional loading or with different kind of setup and ideas inside of it. And that brings a question. First of all, if we would ask someone with beyond our capabilities to invent a new language, what kind of language will it be? What kind of thinking process would they go through? Would they optimize for the speed of communication or for the perspective of their thinking? And I think it's really interesting how it's even hard to imagine all the possible perspectives on how can we ask something to think in different way and to communicate in different way that is not bounded to the human nature. But it gets even more interesting, because let's assume that whatever scientific discoveries we're having right now, they are basically the output, the result of our communication, right? We communicated ideas, we were thinking in different kind of languages in our head. So our scientific discoveries are basically also limited by the language we use and by humanity's imagination power that we have and the logical step-by-step thinking that we try to think about ourselves. But what if, for example, the new language would have different types of perspectives that would allow to create new, I don't know, physics laws or new type of thinking and, ideas and inventions to be happen just because they are operating in this new world. So we can even entertain it further. Maybe they would create multiple languages that are suitable for different inventions or different, ways of thinking around the world. There would be more emotional kind of language. There would be more rational type of language or language specifically tailored to some particular activity and so on and so on. But what's getting very interested, and that's what you see on the slide, is if we assume that creating new language can create any magic in the world. To us, magic is basically what we haven't invented, so we are getting wowed, right? If it can, for example, invent new type of rocket or new type of chemical element or new type of, energy source, then we will consider it's magic because we can't explain it, but it kind of happens and whenever we want. Then the question is, how do you come up with spell? How do you spell? How do you create a magic spell that would direct into the proper magic? And it's even covered in cartoons and different books where the main character misspelled something from the spell book, and suddenly the result is unexpectedly not what they were targeting for, right? Just because they made a mistake, the magic did its own thing, and they spelled out the wrong kind of outcome for the caster, for the person who was reading the magical spell book. But that's exactly what happens with AI today, right? If you're not going to perfect your prompt, it's going to spit out not optimal response to you. So you're basically using the magic spells or prompts, they're kind of interchanging, to receive more magic into your world in different ways. We're just limited to what we know right now, and because it's based on us and stuff like that. But let's imagine like a couple of centuries forward, right? If we have all power in the world to generate any kind of ideas that we want, the biggest bottleneck is not the magic itself. It's the prompting, it's the spells that we have. It's the spell book where we have to say the magic words, and they have to be so precise that we would receive the exactly expected magic that we want without any other consequences. And this is another reference to those, fairy tales where people would spell something and they get what they want, but at the expense of something else that they didn't want, right? I think it's the same for magic, right? Because if we can spell any prompt and get any magic in the world, how can we deal with consequences? Because this is beyond our understanding of what consequences even might be in that front. So I've been entertaining this idea with multiple people, and we're consistently talking about, okay, how can we even frame magic, or how can we create the interface for magic? Because many times the problem with magic is that we just don't know the prompt, the spell, right? We know that there might be an easier solution, but because the language is the bottleneck for both us and current LLM models, we are still just, we don't have the right words to explain what we actually want, or we have the unoptimized way, right? We're asking like, make it shorter, make it in JSON format or stuff like that. But it's also a kind of another way of limitation of the magic, right? Because we're telling magic to be simpler in some ways. We're asking it to be more concise or not as exciting as we want it to be. So I think there are definitely different levels to this of how we can think about it and how we can right now think about the future of magic and come up with our spell book, or start populating it, or thinking, how do we want to design the interface if we know that by clicking on certain buttons or spelling some things in a new way might come out with a more interesting, more magical results? What kind of interface would it be? How we would even frame it, how we would put it in the context of the user, how we can use it to generate something less expected, or like better than expected for user, you know? But how do we even know how to exceed our expectations tenfold if our language is only what we can express about the real world, right? I can't, for example, express right now that the bottle with wine will appear right now near me floating in the space. I know the outcome, but I know that law of physics don't actually allow me to get this bottle of wine floating here. But assuming magic is real, there might be a chance that it would happen in some kind of universe, right? But I just don't know, or I can't even imagine how it will happen, and therefore I can't prompt it in a certain way, especially if we would, imagine that there are like millions, billions of languages around the universe with different species and, aliens and stuff like that. So I think it's really like interesting perspective to look at it, and I'm really looking right now for more partners to jam around these ideas and maybe even, conceptualize how these type of interfaces for magic would look like. I hope it was interesting, and let me know if you're, excited about this topic as well. See ya. Bye-bye.